Brandon Victor Swanson was born on January 30th, 1989, in Marshall, Minnesota, a quiet, agricultural town of about 13,000 people. By all accounts, he was exactly the kind of kid you'd want to know. Bookish, kind, curious. He loved reading, had a particular passion for science, and was close with his family, including his younger sister and his parents, Brian and Annette. After graduating from Marshall High School in 2007, Brandon chose to stay close to home and enroll at Minnesota West Community and Technical College, where he was studying wind energy and renewable turbine technology. He had real ambitions. He had already made plans to transfer to Iowa Western College, over 250 miles away, in the fall. His future looked bright. His family was proud. Everything was on track. That is, until the night of May 13th, 2008. May 13th, 2008 was the last day of spring semester at Minnesota West. Brandon and his friends decided to celebrate. He went to a small party with fellow students. He had a couple drinks, enjoyed himself. Nothing alarming. Later in the evening, around 10:30 p.m., he went to visit another friend in the town of Canby. He had one more drink there, but friends present said they weren't concerned. He wasn't dangerously intoxicated. He said his goodbyes. Nobody thought twice about it. None of Brandon's friends could have known that this was the last time he would ever be seen. Brandon got into his car. His destination was Marshall, just about 35 miles away. A straight, simple drive on Highway 68. But for reasons we still don't fully understand, Brandon chose to take the back roads instead, despite not being very familiar with the rural Minnesota roads. Those back roads, unlit, unpaved, winding through farmland, would change everything. Shortly after midnight on May 14th, Brandon drove his car into a ditch. He wasn't hurt, but his car was stuck, and he was somewhere in the rural darkness with no clear idea of exactly where he was. He called his parents. Brian and Annette Swanson were woken up in the pre-dawn hours by the phone. Brandon told them he'd driven into a ditch and needed help getting home. He told them he believed he was near Lind, a small town roughly 7 miles southwest of Marshall. That seemed plausible. His parents didn't panic. They just got in their pickup truck and went to find their son. What followed was one of the most heartbreaking and baffling phone calls in any missing persons case on record. Brandon told his parents he was just 10 minutes from home, but though Annette and Brian drove to where Brandon thought he was, they couldn't find any sign of him or his car. They flashed their headlights. They could hear Brandon doing the same on his end of the call. But there was nothing around them but darkness. Minutes passed. Frustration grew. The darkness seemed to swallow every attempt at connection. At one point, Annette even hung up the phone, though she immediately called back and apologized. This was 2008. There was no share my location, no GPS pin drop, just voices in the dark, trying to find each other. Eventually, Brandon made a decision. He told his parents he was going to start walking toward the lights he could see in the distance. Lights he believed belonged to the town of Lind. He told his father to head for the parking lot of a local bar and wait for him there. Brian dropped Annette off at home, then headed back out into the night. Father and son kept talking as Brandon walked. Brandon trying to describe where he was, Brian driving around, scanning the roadside for any sign of his son. Brandon mentioned passing fences. He mentioned hearing water nearby. He kept walking. Brian kept driving. 47 minutes into that call, Brandon suddenly interrupted himself and shouted, "Oh shit!" Then the line went dead. Brian called back and called back and called back. Brandon never answered again. A few hours later, at around 6:30 a.m., his frantic parents notified the police. And here's where the story gets even more troubling. When his parents first reported him missing, police advised them to wait, that such behavior wasn't uncommon for young men his age. They essentially told a family whose son had vanished mid-sentence on the phone to just sit tight. But that same day, something critical emerged. Cell phone records revealed that Brandon had actually been near Porter, Minnesota, 25 miles from where he had told his parents he thought he was. He hadn't been near Lind at all. He had been miles away, in an entirely different county, walking through rural farmland in the pitch-black early morning hours, completely disoriented. Using cell tower technology, investigators were eventually able to pinpoint the area of his last known communications. That's how they located his car. No keys were found in or around the scene. There were no obvious signs of foul play. Just an empty car, in the dark, miles from where he thought he was. Search dogs were deployed. They led authorities to the banks of the Yellow Medicine River, a river that, at the time of Brandon's disappearance, was running fast and high. In some areas, it was knee-deep. In others, up to 15 feet deep. Investigators feared the worst, that Brandon had stumbled into the river in the darkness and drowned. Since that day, more than 500 volunteers have spent over 120 days searching for Brandon, covering over 100 square miles, including more than 30 dog handlers from 9 different states. The result? No evidence, no clues, nothing. The Swansons left their porch light on all night, every night, as a symbol of their hope that Brandon would eventually return. A practice they continued for at least 5 years. So what happened to Brandon Swanson? The most widely accepted theory is accidental drowning. The dogs led to the river. Brandon had mentioned hearing water. The Yellow Medicine was dangerously swollen that night. It's possible he stumbled in during the dark and the current carried him away. But here's the problem. After 2 years and innumerable searches of the river, no body was ever found. And investigators noted that if Brandon had drowned there, his body likely would have surfaced. What about foul play? Authorities say there is neither any evidence of foul play, nor any evidence that Brandon would have staged his own disappearance. One popular theory is that he was the victim of a hit and run, and someone hid his body. But authorities found absolutely no evidence of such an accident anywhere on the road. Could he have run away? This scenario is considered extremely unlikely. There was no indication Brandon was planning to disappear, and the very fact that he stayed on the phone with his father for 47 minutes, actively trying to get home, makes intentional disappearance nearly impossible to believe. Some have theorized he may have become severely hypothermic and collapsed in a field, or fallen into a drainage ditch or creek. But even with state-of-the-art equipment and techniques, and over 100 square miles searched, investigators found nothing. Brandon Swanson vanished as thoroughly as if the earth had swallowed him whole. Brandon's disappearance didn't just haunt his family, it changed the law. His parents successfully lobbied the Minnesota state legislature to pass what became known as Brandon's Law. The law requires police to begin investigations of missing adults promptly, without being allowed to refuse a report based on the belief that no crime was involved, the brevity of time since the person was last seen, or the possibility that the person may have intentionally disappeared. After it passed both chambers, including unanimously in the lower house, Governor Tim Pawlenty signed it into law in May 2009, with the Swanson family present at the ceremony. Because of Brandon, the next missing adult in Minnesota gets an immediate response. Because of Brandon, other families might get answers that his never did. That is not a small thing. That is a legacy. But it doesn't bring him home. The tragedy of Brandon Swanson's case lies in the sheer mystery of it all. A bright young man making a phone call to his loving parents vanished mid-sentence. The silence that followed has lasted for over 17 years. No body, no crime scene, no confession, no closure. Just a phone call that ended with 2 words, and a family that has never stopped waiting. Brandon was 5 feet 6 inches, around 120 pounds, with naturally curly brown hair, blue eyes, and black wire-framed glasses. He was legally blind in his left eye. He was last seen wearing a white t-shirt, a blue striped polo sweatshirt, baggy blue jeans, a black zip-up jacket, a white flat-billed Minnesota Twins cap, and white sneakers. Hit that like button so this story reaches more people. Subscribe if you want to follow more cases like Brandon's. Stories that deserve to be told, voices that deserve to be heard. And in the comments, leave a light on for Brandon. Because somewhere, his family still is. See you in the next one.